The Grim Discovery. I went out one lonesome night in the chilly winds, under the pretty moon drifting with the breeze. Under my feet were moss-grown ruins. The forest has had its way with the cabins of centuries ago. The wind still blows, the moon still shines, and as I grew weary and restless, I ventured out amongst the pines and firs to get a grasp or some kind of a hold on myself. The news had reached me that my wife was to stay home where she was, and that the way back to our house was too risky. Too much risk to bear for our 2 children, too much burden on my sick wife who was in care of her family in her hometown of Muscle Shoals. What was supposed to be a 3 weeks vacation turned quickly into a 3-month panic. The power grids had gone off, the water stopped running, various services became obsolete, and quickly the military came rushing home. Took them 3 months to rebuild the damn grid, but it isn't really finished yet. My wife's brother is saying it will take decades to get it back to where it was. For Christ's sake, we practically reinvented the telegraph for communication. My wife and I did not know Morse code, and I had to be brief with our our messages. The wind was biting the back of my neck, and so I pulled up my collar as I stood near where she and I made love one summer. It's a muddy mess now that it's winter, but I'm sentimental like that. The moon glowed like a cream-colored lamp, showing the spot where the willow tree once was before the lightning struck that tree down one summer. The light pink blossoms it would bring every Easter reminded her of the tulips she loved to obsess over. So we've given in to apathy. She can't make it back up to Tennessee, and I can't afford or risk traveling through the hundreds of miles of back road trying to avoid all the abandoned cards and marauders. It was as if we had to say goodbye, but we haven't actually given in to that yet. These dying forests are regrowing, though. And the stars, oh gosh, my eyes have never seen so many. The wind was picking up. It was time for me to face the fact that I'm not sleeping tonight. I returned to the hearth in our cabin we designed and built ourselves. The coyotes never stopped howling that night. I eventually fell asleep around 5 a.m., or at least I told myself that's what time it was. Suddenly I see this blast of light coming through the sky. It looked too smooth to be a comet. It was no meteor shower. The edge of the property was not too far from where it had fallen. I wondered if it was a satellite or part of a plane. As far as I knew, the land was not being controlled by anybody. I thought to myself, what's the harm in having a look? I pulled out my dagger and started swiping away at the overgrowth of briar bushes unsuccessfully. I noticed the volume of space that I was taking up at a time, the crunch of snow giving away my very coordinates, the rapid movement of bush limbs, and myself, a 6'4" man moving quickly through the forest. I tried to silence my movements as well as I could when I saw some of my wife's daffodils had been planted throughout the forest. It was like being a widower, even though she's doing fine in Alabama. The deciduous tree canopy had little openings in it, and I could see the moon shining through, reflecting off the petals of the daffodils. It made me miss her. It made me feel lonesome. I was grieving the end of our time together. The strange thing that fell from the sky glowed in the distance, making a humming sound. I got closer and closer to it, and finally, as I was about to approach the scene, my foot got caught in some briars and I had to cut my way out. It took a bit of time. I look up from the ground to see no more glowing, hear no more humming, no longer smelling that strange scent of smoke. It was the oddest occurrence on the property. 2 nights ago, in fact, last night seemed normal. Tonight, however, I hear some strange sounds from the cabin. It reminded me of the peacock farm in Georgia that me and my wife had visited. It was like a peacock in distress, or a coyote howl, but much more sinister to my ears. It had no echo, just a loudness that carried. It was a muffled screech but lower pitch. I've kept the barriers to the inside of my cabin blocked with firewood. Here I sit drinking some champagne from our wedding. Her mother supplied us with many bottles, the leftovers we stored in the basement, and that was where I feared the sounds were coming from. Upon retrieving 3 bottles from the basement, I saw there was no evidence of anything down there. The night has been long, and I am craving sleep. It has been 7 days since I heard the strange noises in my cabin and saw the strange lights at the edge of the property. I felt comfortable enough today to play some piano. The old thing is out of tune, and my tuning kit being in the basement, I went down there reluctantly since I've been too scared to go. However, today around 6 hours ago, I finally descended those dusty cobwebs of wooden steps which creaked out in pain and old age. I quickly grabbed my tuning kit and 2 bottles of champagne. I had once been a drunk. Then shortly after I had recovered, the world had gone to the dogs. My wife and I were lucky to have all these bottles left over after the wedding. Our cat Samson sat on my lap as I sat tuning the piano. Around 6 p.m. as the sun was setting, Samson yelled out something terrible, causing me great alarm. He is me and my wife's beloved companion, after all. He was on his back, unable to move. Tears were welling up in my eyes as Samson cried out more in agony. I had no time to save him. He passed away quickly. It was a great shock to me. I couldn't really handle it for a while. I was going to take his body to the veterinarian, so I started gathering my coat and belt in a travel bag. The veterinarian lived just down the street by chance in a cul-de-sac, next to the dentist and the infamous Rutledge Manor. I was crying thinking about having to carry Simpson's body all the way to Dr. Morgan. She was a very talented scientist, even without equipment. It was she who could tell me what killed him. However, I hardly got the chance to leave. As Samson laid there, dead and beginning to attract flies, his stomach, which was bloated to its full potential, began to move. It moved like something inside of it was trying to escape. My eyes took a double take as I could not believe what I saw. When out of my dead cat's belly ripped out a hole. Out of that hole came blood oozing and guts falling out in a set of tendrils, like the most alien set of phalanges I've ever seen, yet something very distinctly resembling fingers of some sort, attached to a hand and an arm. It was a long creature, best described to be 2 feet tall as it finally stretched out and upwards. Like an anthropomorphic caterpillar, its face was a mere circular row of teeth repeating downwards into its center in a spiral. Its many fingers helped it crawl about. I ran away from it like the disease it probably was. If it did that to Samson, by God, I'd take my own life before this thing, whatever it was. And it was indeed true, if the worst should ever come. I had a kit ready for the occasion. However, I am not ready to die. So I made my way to Stacy Morgan's house. And here it is 8:30 p.m. I've got 15 minutes more to walk and I'll camp in the ditch if I have to. She's a family friend and won't raise no fuss. I had nothing to stay home for. My cat is dead. My family is 300 miles away. My house is being invaded by what I suspected to be an alien creature. I did not take the street route as I knew a shortcut through the forest. I'd have to climb the tall iron fence behind Rutledge Manor and cross through the yard. As far as I know, nobody lives there. When that part of the forest came, a green glow came from a high window. In the highest room of Rutledge Manor, that green light glowed. The neighborhood was oddly dark, even for 9 p.m. During these days, people slept under sunshine and survived the cool nights with minimal meals. Candles would definitely be lit somewhere, if not whole fire pits. I found a way outside of cutting through the Rutledge yard and saw the darkened cul-de-sac in front of me. The Morgan residence was also ominously quiet and dark. So I pulled out my sleeping mat and Afghan and rested a while until the sun had risen. Thoughts about the green light and Samson, my family, Dr. Morgan, followed through my dreams like crunching footsteps in the snow. Waking up every hour to realize I'm only dreaming, and after a while I was able to rest under the canopy of purple clouds and green aurora. The very cause of our troubles brought as much beauty as it did suffering. Gregor! I was stuck on my back, exhausted, and this lady was standing above me. Gregor, wake up! Mr. Beaumont, now! I panicked out of my sleep paralysis to see Stacy Morgan's outline in a rising sun which warmed her back and darkened her front, though her piercing green eyes shone through the darkness. As I rose up from the deadening stupor of exhaustion I was in, I saw she had her medical bag and was tucking away her stethoscope. I had buttoned my shirt back as she did this, and I said, "Thanks, doctor. My cat, he exploded as a parasite ripped out of his stomach." Yeah." I was almost shocked to hear her calloused words, relieved I had not hallucinated, and realizing the bleak reality that there is such a thing as a pet-murdering parasite. Kills all mammals. We need to burn your cabin. Find a shelter together, Mr. Beaumont. We have to go now. She pulled my arm and I glanced behind me, forgetting I had already fastened my pack and dagger, the useless little thing. I followed Dr. Morgan everywhere she went, sometimes with conversation. They're resistant to all known drugs. I throw cups of diatomaceous earth on them, and it doesn't kill them right away, but the Stimpies, she named the parasites after a cartoon television show that came out during what had to be our great-grandparents' childhood. They generally are slowed down by sediment and seem to be allergic to grass after maturation. They're carried as eggs by fleas and flies. I remembered how Samson loved to hunt flies. Hell, he and a few spiders and bats could make a team. Except the bats had disappeared 5 years ago. Could it have been? You might be right. This may be the parasite that killed bats, leaving their corpses less violently, and in smaller, less mutated generation which adapted in caves. It makes sense because they cannot stand the standard grass species across America. She walked faster as she rambled in her scientific hypotheses. We were heading towards the riverbank forest. She went on to talk about caves and how her friend Steve was an expert on the subject and was awaiting us in his cabin. He was to return from a conference in Nashville that got cut short due to the national state of emergency. She said Steve was excellent at Morse code, fought in the brigade during the Fourth World War. Dr. Morgan and I stopped traveling 30 miles on foot in a cute northwesternly way towards the Cumberland River. I had noticed we'd follow the forest and grassy fields as much as possible and back into what was a row of slim forests about a mile wide lining up and down the river. We trekked the field as a small cabin in the distance grew larger and closer, and we hiked towards it, mud and snow threatening to cover our grassy protections. We had arrived, and Stacy, knocking at the door, found a key under the smoking bench where Steve told her it was. Steve had not made it home yet, and Stacy, with her diatomaceous earth in a large open bag in one hand and a cup in the other. I let her lead the way as I carried the flashlight beside her. We saw no movement from outside, and after realizing the cabin was clean, she cranked on the generator and started sprinkling her powder all around the inside and outside perimeter of Steve's cabin. Her green eyes poking out from behind her face mask, my scarf started to make my beard and neck itch. She put on his dehumidifier and found a wood stove and immediately started a 12-hour fire which kept us warm all night and minimized how much work the generator had to do. Steve never came. Dr. Morgan knew the city would be a hot spot for fleas carrying the stimpy eggs. All the city dwellers and their furry companions would carry these eggs, and with more concrete than grass, riddled and crawling with these freakish large parasites, the stimpies wriggling with centipede legs and leech-like faces, hungry to sting and feed off mammals. To lay its eggs or to consume, that is its prime directive. Both end in a certain death, and one is time delayed with a hint of agony. Stacy informed me that until Steve's telegraph machine or radio gave us communication, we were stuck at his cabin until either a parasite came or some other threat, or Steve may return. Mr. Beaumont, what you have to understand is, she told me, these old viruses, we could fight back. Heck, wars are even survivable, as long as nobody goes nuclear. But this parasite has changed, seemingly overnight, the trajectory of human beings and all mammals as we know it. I began to cry, thinking about my wife, our kids. Samson's dying yowl kept going in the back of my mind. You must never return home until we can get fumigation teams. She let go of my hand and gave me a hug. It's the only comforting thing for the both of us. We talked all morning after Steve never showed up, but it was mostly Stacy informing me of her hunches. She was no ordinary practicing veterinarian. She read all the latest scientific journals, attended lectures frequently, gathering knowledge like a sponge absorbs hot and bubbled soap water. She seemed desperate to theorize a fight against the stimpies. Steve's property was about 50 acres of pasture, 30 acres of forest and riverbank, though he had no water rights, just the well water from the nearby channels of springs. Stacy said Steve told us to avoid the southwestern portion of his property. There is a pond and a creek there, but also a cave system. If my theory is correct, and if, like you proposed, the bats were the mutating grounds for stimpies, caves are absolutely off limits. And so I went listening to everything this wonderful veterinarian and fiercely constructive individual told me as I began to trust her with my life. She told me how she saw her own colleagues and patients perish during a 1-week series of nightmares beyond imagination. How she had to run from her job and head home through a panicking general public. She told me how lucky I was to be secluded at a summer vacation home, how there was just enough grass behind my home to run away in as I had, and how the river, which curved as south as East Union, came up to a rocky bank which I was our front yard. How I had missed me and my wife's summer home already, drinking beers and smoking on the porch with a fish pole, an AM radio, waving and tipping my hat at the steamboats which passed on by and producing more clouds than my cigar as the fireflies danced around the house, which made me realize something else, the fireflies. Remember when we had fireflies? I asked the doctor. Yeah, grew up in East Union like you, Gregor. Just 3 years your senior. Gosh, lightning bugs went extinct. Like, what was it, 5 years ago? Dr. Morgan gasped. Oh, Gregor! Stacy shouted at my suggestion. I rose my eyebrows and wondered how the fireflies related to anything. The parasites get fleas and flies, but not fireflies. They mutated in dying generations of bats slowly, but died with their bioluminescent hosts. Fireflies mate in grass, which the parasite is allergic to, so we may have some leads on a sure way to fight them. She began to pace, stammering out theory after theory on what the Stimpies were allergic to, specifically that existed in grass, sediment, and fireflies. We wondered if luciferin had anything to do with it, but there was really no access to that, especially with the extinction of fireflies. She wondered aloud all the possible threats to the Stimpies, even in their egg stage. Perhaps their eggs are in their drool, and their stinger is just a defensive mechanism, but also injects its saliva riddled with eggs. No. The day went on like this until she heard my stomach growl and she showed me where Steve's survival pantry was. I made us some rice and beans after thawing out some chicken that Stacy inspected first, of course. I used the wood stove and my attempts were almost unsuccessful, but it gave us a hearty meal. Stacy then got quiet in Steve's giant recliner as I laid on his couch. Me and the doctor in Steve's cabin, sharing silence as the wood stove crackled. The candle flames drifted with the air circulating inside. It was a perfect 72 degrees. Stacy's piercing green eyes reflected the swaying wisps of fire upon their wax towers. She drifted off into a deep, thoughtless brood. I wanted to comfort her, but I knew there was none I could give her. Eventually, she broke the hours-long silence, which lasted until midnight. She stood up and walked over beside the hearth where a shelf with some antique textbooks laid horizontal between candle holders and picture frames of Steve and his family. Steve was an average build, thick glasses, and a bit chubby but still handsome. His wife equally so. They looked very happy together. Stacy held the frame and then put it back. Loudly she leaned on the shelf and mourned and moaned out, "Oh, Steve," sobbing in heartbreaking fits of tears. I, of course, was not going to tell her lies of comfort, but I rested my hands on her shoulder and asked, "How did the two of you meet?" She turned and cried on my shoulder a bit, and we held each other close. And a guilty part of me felt wrong for savoring the catharsis of this small bit of comfort during such a crisis. My wife is far gone from my life, but I made a vow, religious or not, and I meant it. So I let Stacy go and asked her where the coffee was. I kissed her forehead and patted her lap and said, "Let's have some coffee and talk about y'all's most precious memories. If you don't want to, I completely understand." Stacy dried her face. She brought me ground coffee beans in a paper sack, of all things, labeled Colombian Brew. It was a rather strange packaging, but we accepted it as a blessing. Coffee is coffee, after all, and we had been oversleeping in. Stacy found the honey, and with the pure and fresh spring water, we actually agreed it was the best coffee we had ever drank. Stacy told me how she met Steve after her first divorce and how she hated that he was married and also hated how loyal and faithful he was to his wife. It wasn't the latter that she truly hated, however. She just really hated her own irrational desires to possess this Apparently, amazing individual of a man. So he's a cave specialist? Yeah, it's a wonder he lived as long as he lived. I have no doubts that he is gone, Gregor. I just know it. But she said he was in our town for technology and government conference. Yes, I have no idea what the conference addressed specifically, as I didn't get the chance to truly catch up with him. I just know there's a lot of spelunkers there, a lot of people that have been in caves, possibly exposed to this parasite. She said as more tears painted her cheeks. He was a multi-talented man. There's no telling what he was getting into academically, and I could go through all his papers he left in his study, but a part of me feels wrong for it. Dr. Morgan, I spoke up. I know that perhaps you felt as if you were toxic for his relationship life, and maybe you overstepped some boundaries once or twice, but he kept in contact with you and you reached out to him. Since you two both loved information and science exploration, and y'all met at a science conference, for Christ's sake, something tells me that if anybody deserves Steve's blessing to research his papers, it's you, Dr. Stacy Morgan, the smartest, most beautiful woman from East Union. She smiled, and for a moment time slowed down as our eyes met, and we both finished laughing. Our hands were still touching. I broke the silence awkwardly, because I could tell that she too wanted to lean in, and from there, well, you know the rest. Let's dig in, I said, making a stupid noise with an equally stupid face. I could tell I successfully killed the buzz, as Stacy's facial expression showed irritation, perhaps a little hurt. This went away as she saw me twisting my wedding ring around my finger. It was what I did when I got nervous. It became a habit I developed in the 20 years of marriage I spent wearing it. I couldn't bear the thought of giving up hope on my wife this soon just to find out she survived. I am the most hopeless romantic, and even she knew. I am the most hopeless romantic, and even that hopeless romantic in me knew she was probably dead, or that the notion of even seeing her again was a lost cause. But I had my own solid rocks, my own foundations and ground to stand on. For Stacy, and probably Stephen too, they had science. For my wife and I, it was music, and of course each other. While some need money or wealth, and others are just as good on bread, water, and prayer, Susan and I lived together in the same lifelong melody. It was the belief that kept me listening to Stacy and not courting her, as beautiful, intelligent, and likable as she was. The temptation was real, of course, but I could not compromise my core survival motivation. I had to reach Susan again, one way or another, if only to find her and know for sure. We found Steve's office. It was at the center of an impressive yet unorganized library. His desks had large folders with scraps in no particular order or sequence. Some were labeled, some weren't. Stacy and I pored through his writings and findings until we found 3 large overfilled vanilla folders bursting at their seams, labeled The Secrets of the Ferns. Now here I shall pause in my personal story to share with you what Stacy and I found in these 3 folders. It may confuse you, dear reader, if humanity does survive and anyone bothers to read it, that is. However, don't be alarmed at the lack of organization. This document, which we have put in the order we found it in, has changed at least Dr. Morgan's and mine perspective as well, on reality altogether. Just when the Stimpies seemed to be the biggest terror of our existence. We studied and studied over and over, rereading in shifts the secrets of the ferns. Some of the document was written by Steve himself, interspersed with journalist clippings and accounts from what appears to be colleagues of Steve with code names like Anansi. Other parts read like the Dead Sea Scrolls and did not make sense until we read it to the end over and over. We even wondered if we should question Steve or if he had a strange creative side. But if you should find these copies of the writings by myself, Dr. Morgan, Steve, and this collection of accounts he acquired, know that you must protect it with your life. Know that you are being watched, tracked even. But light begets light, and one should only keep an eye out for the glow of the fireflies, or worse, the fluttering of bats. And so here is the audio I began for 14 out of 42 of the writings and findings of Stephen White, wherever he may be. There is much work to be done to save humanity from the threats that pose grave danger to its existence. Perhaps before we act, much more documents will be found, waiting to uncover the truth behind our very universe.